4K has been the main point of conversation when it comes to TVs and monitors these past couple years. A function of them, HDR in particular, has kind of taken the back seat in people's minds, even though it is considered a premium feature, asking for top dollar in the PC monitor space. But BenQ's decided to tackle this with a budget-oriented 1080p HDR-enabled monitor. So can this sub $300 panel here stand up against all the $600, $700 monitors you could get with HDR enabled? Let's take a look.
So, the BenQ EW277HDR. Straight out of the box, there were two things that impressed me: the durability of the monitor's stand, as well as the edge-to-edge display. This is the first panel I've ever owned that has an edge-to-edge display since I started gaming almost exclusively on the PC. The monitor itself feels really well built, which is a good thing. There was a time when BenQ wasn't really known for a lot of quality products. Since then, they have put forward a lot of effort to rectify this, and it's really beginning to show. I did notice something that was a bit different with this device's design. In terms of video, the back panel only really consisted of a VGA input as well as two HDMI inputs. Up until now, every panel I've used would have a DVI port on the back, which seemed to be the industry standard. I was a little concerned about this because, looking at this monitor from a graphic designer standpoint, I was worried that this would cause issues with the visual fidelity. It was always ingrained in me that I should be using a DVI port over anything else to achieve maximum visual fidelity, but the technology and HDMI cables have gotten to a point where there's almost no difference now between DVI and HDMI. So I think we'll be seeing more of this over the next couple years. One thing to take note of here: if you're looking for a monitor that supports VESA mounts, this is not one of them. Other than the video inputs, it also has an audio input and a speaker or headphone out port. Audio-wise, the speakers aren't exactly the best. I do feel like it has something to do with the fact that they are back-mounted, that is to say they're facing away from you. It causes some acoustic problems, so it's good that they allow you to hook your own headphones or some speakers into the monitor itself. Especially because it seems like BenQ wants you to use this device for not just your computer use, but also another console or possibly any kind of cable television or other kind of media input. So to allow this device to be a centralized source of sound, but also to give the user options, was a really good idea. Now when it comes to the actual specs for the monitor, I did ask BenQ for a list so I could possibly relay that to you, but it never really got back to us, so I kind of have to go with what I learned from kind of browsing around the internet. It seems that BenQ built this with a VA panel. Now that gives the image on the screen a really nice 178-degree viewing angle. It also gives the image a 4 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. Now gray-to-gray seems to be the industry standard in terms of what they'll report on with their monitors' response times. In looking around, it seems that most other monitors will keep their refresh rate at about 12 milliseconds, and the gaming-oriented devices all seem to start at about 5 milliseconds. The panel also sits at about 20 milliseconds of input lag, which is 30 less than what an average controller takes to send information to a console. And in the gaming arena, it's considered that 40 milliseconds of input lag on a monitor tends to be okay. So the input lag and the refresh rate certainly sits in a good pedigree for gaming, and the native contrast ratio is right there with it. It's reported that it has a static contrast ratio of 3,000 to 1. Now you may have seen companies who report several million to 1 ratios. Those are considered dynamic. And what that means is if the monitor sits on an image for long enough, it can maybe achieve that level of contrast. But if the images are moving, it might only achieve about 1,000 to 1 contrast ratio overall. And 1,000 to 1 tends to be more of the standard with most monitors in terms of static contrast. Now for a budget product, this information's pretty mind-blowing. But if on top of this you're also looking for something with a ridiculously high frame rate, you're not going to find it here. This does hit about 75 frames per second, which is good, it's reasonable. But I imagine if BenQ was aiming for this to be a 144Hz screen, the price would go through the roof. Now all of that's just the basic specs, the basic aesthetics. But what makes this panel special is that HDR that comes at the end of the model number. This panel supports HDR10. And HDR is the big new monitor performance buzz term. The HDMI 2.0 cable they provide you with in the box is able to utilize as much of that 3,000 to 1 contrast ratio we just talked about to provide an image with way more depth. The lights and darks and level of vibrance within the colors themselves that can be achieved with HDR10 is astoundingly noticeable, even at the scale of 1080p. From a gaming standpoint, it adds an almost crisp visual style to anything you're playing in. Now, not every game comes with HDR as a toggleable function, so BenQ did something interesting and added a method through the monitor itself to emulate HDR. It adds a sort of filter effect over top of whatever you're looking at, adjusting the levels, the hue, the saturation, to try to bring whatever you're viewing more in line with what it would be if it had HDR enabled. And the benefits for the monitor don't end there. As an illustrator and designer, as well as a digital video editor, the specs of this panel have shown that it achieves high percentiles of color fidelity within color spaces developed specifically for the products that I use. In particular, Adobe RGB, where it hits about 80%. Now that's good. Normally you want something above 90% in that color gamut, but as the common theme of this review has pointed out, the moment you go that far, the price tag kind of goes up exponentially. But the monitor also supports 93% of the DCI P3 color gamut, which is widely used in digital cinema and can be found in a lot of high-end cell phones, as well as the more recent iMac Pro.
So there you have it, a solid purchase. Everything I would possibly want in a single monitor right here. It was wonderful for doing any of my design work. It was great for gaming. I've been playing on it for about 3 weeks now. It's just this brilliant device for the price that you're getting. I think currently I've seen it at about $260, even though the base price seems to be $300. And I couldn't have done better, honestly, for a monitor at that price range. I'm curious where they'll go from here. Whether it'll be 4K or high refresh rate, should be pretty interesting. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button. Really helps us out, and subscribe for some more gaming and tech news. See you in the next video.